The next fly that we'll be doing is a parachute emerger. This is an emerger pattern that you can use as a midge emerger or as a small mayfly emerger. Once you've practiced and mastered the techniques that we've learned on some of the previous flies in the show today, it'll allow you to become more comfortable with working on the smaller sized hooks. And we're going to step down to a size 18. You can see how much smaller this is compared to what we've been working with so far. But again, once your comfort level becomes greater with some of those techniques and handling the materials and your thread control, you can start stepping down into these smaller sizes, and much smaller than this, in fact. For this pattern, we'll use some Antron yarn for the trailing shuck of the tail. We'll use ultra thread for the abdomen, and we'll rib that or segment that body with ultra thread just colored with a permanent marker. Our thorax will be dubbed at a super fine dubbing. Our parachute post will be done from some closed cell foam, and then we'll use some whiting dry fly hackle for our parachute hackle. Let's go ahead and put a hook in the vise and go ahead and start this pattern. The hook we'll be using is a 2x short, more or less an emerger pupa type hook. And on these smaller flies like this, I prefer to work with a ring eye or an up eye style hook to help open the gap of the hook up a little bit. So as you start getting into those real tiny sizes, some consideration needs to be taken into your hook selection as well. We're going to work with a beige colored ultra thread. This is the color combination that I use for a small Baetis or blue-winged olive emerger. We'll start our thread right at the eye of the hook, and we'll wind back about a third of the way down the hook shank behind the eye. The first thing that we're going to tie on with this pattern is going to be our foam post, and we'll work with an orange, kind of a fluorescent orange closed cell foam. This is a 2 millimeter thick foam, and I've already pre-cut just a 2 millimeter square piece of the foam. And the foam's available in a variety of different colors, so you can choose a color that's going to be easily visible for you while you're fishing this. We'll go ahead and bring that piece of foam to the hook, and we're going to tie this with the foam facing out over the eye of the hook. We can leave a little bit, or a pretty good length of that extending out over the eye, so it's a little bit easier to work with and tie. I'm going to take about 3 or 4 tight wraps of thread and set that in about a third of the way back from the eye of the hook. At this point I can come in with my scissors, and I'm going to stretch that rear portion of the foam and trim that with my scissors. We can come in with our thread and just cover that little bit of remaining foam from where we made our cut and taper that into the shank of the hook. And we don't need to worry about getting 100% coverage on that. If a little bit of the foam is showing through, that's fine at this point, because we'll cover that when we actually build the abdomen of the fly. Then I'll pull the foam back and take just a few wraps in front of the foam just to help get that foam standing vertical to the hook shank. And now we can parachute or bundle or post that foam. And I'll start just at the base, and just with moderate pressure. You want to be a little bit careful because you can cut through the foam with your thread. So just moderate pressure, and we'll work up that foam post about half the distance or half the length of the eye of the hook. This space right in here from the shank up the post, and that just creates a platform for us to wrap our hackle on. Now sometimes with these small hooks, especially these curved hooks, you need to reposition your hook in the vise so that you can more easily work at the rear of the hook. So I'm just going to reposition my hook in the vise and angle the eye of the hook down more towards my working surface. So it gives me more of a flat platform right back in here to work with putting my tail or my trailing shuck on there. And again, we want to maintain, just as we have with many of the other flies today in the tape or in the show, a smooth thread platform. Now for our trailing shuck, we're going to work with some Antron yarn, and this is just kind of an light olive brown colored Antron. And your Antron color of choice when you're doing these emergers should be the same color as the nymph husk, because that's really what we're representing, is the husk of that nymph still attached to the back end of that dry fly as it's emerging out of its nymphal stage. And we're going to take only about a quarter of that strand of Antron in terms of a quantity for a size 18 hook. Obviously, if you were going smaller, you'd want to take even a lesser amount of that. So I'll come in and just trim one end of it. So I've got an even cut that we can then come in and position on the hook. And I'm going to leave enough of the antron laying forward that it'll come up and join where I've made that cut when we first tied the foam on, just to help even that underbody a little bit more, even though we are going to build a tapered body. Just use a soft loop to come in and catch that. And then I'm going to wind forward up over the butt ends of the antron to trap that to the hook shank. And again, I've got just a couple stragglers. I'm just going to come in with my scissors right on the underside of the hook and remove those. And again, by spinning your bobbin counterclockwise, you can untwist that thread so it lays down extremely flat, just like a piece of floss. And we'll build that abdomen. The tie-in point of the foam, right up behind the post, right in this area, has already created our thickest part of our taper for our body. So we just need to make a nice smooth transition between that and the portion of the abdomen back by the trailing shuck that we've just tied in. And to segment this, we're going to take our tying thread back to the rear of the hook right in front of the shuck. At this point, I'm going to spin my bobbin clockwise and twist it up so it's more like a rope. It's in a round form. And we're going to go to a darker color of olive permanent marker. And we'll just use this as an ad marker. And there's many varieties of different permanent type of markers available. But we'll come in and we'll color that thread, or we'll paint the thread with the marker just up here near the hook. So we'll come in and lay a coat of marker on there. And then we're going to wrap this or segment the abdomen with that secondary color of thread. So it allows you to do an extremely thin segmented body. You've got great control of how many segments or the placement of your segments as you wind this forward. This is a great technique if you're doing like small spinner patterns, for example, and maybe if you're doing little tricos, which are little micro spinners, 24s and 26s, where a quill or a biot sometimes might be a little too bulky to get all that on the hook. You can do these real thin little thread bodies. So once we've got that segmented, I've wrapped the thread, I've left it in front of the post. I'm going to come in with my scissors and I'm going to trim our trailing shuck at about the same length as the hook. So we'll trim that, and at this point, now that we're going to focus all of our efforts on the thorax up here in front of the post, I'm going to go ahead and reposition the hook one more time, because we're going to tie a hackle feather in up there, and we still need to dub a thorax. And by positioning the hook with the hook angled up a little bit more, we don't run the risk of the material sliding off. For our hackle, we'll work with a dun-colored, this is a whiting rooster cape, and I've already pre-selected and pre-sized a feather. To prepare that, we'll come in and trim the web off the base of the neck feather. Make a short cut on each side of the stem just to leave some teeth on the stem so that the thread has something to grab. And we'll go ahead and tie this in front of that foam post. And we're going to keep that right against the post. Now we're ready to dub our thorax. And the thorax will work with some super fine dubbing. We're going to work with a color that's going to imitate the natural that we're trying to imitate. So I'm going to work with just kind of an olive gray to imitate a little Baetis adult. The thorax of this, you're actually representing the head of that mayfly adult or that midge crawling out of the shuck. And all we're going to do here is just dub a little ball. It's just to get a colored separation between the abdomen and the thorax so that the overall body of the fly is two-toned in appearance. So we'll build our ball and we'll leave our thread right at the eye of the hook. We'll come in with our hackle pliers, and I'm going to work with a hackle plier from Stonefly Tool Company. It's a rotating hackle plier that makes these parachute patterns extremely easy. Because the tips of the plier are on a swivel, it allows you to stay away from the hook so you can see what you're doing. It's extremely helpful on these small flies. We'll take 4 or 5 wraps of hackle. We'll bring the hackle to our side of the hook. We'll pull the fibers back to expose the eye of the hook in our tie-in area. We'll let the weight of the hackle pliers hold the feather on our side of the hook so that we can come in and catch that with our thread. We'll take 2 or 3 tight wraps of thread to hold that in position. If we come in and if we just put a little bit of slack onto that feather and then just give it a quick pull towards the rear of the hook, we can break that off so that we don't have to come in and trim it and run the risk of leaving a little piece of that stem sticking into the eye. Come in and do a little cleanup trim right at the eye. I've got a couple stray fibers. And then we're going to hook up to our whip finisher and go ahead and complete the fly. Get the whip finisher hooked up. We pull the hackle and the post back out of the way. And we'll actually let the whip finisher build part of our head. Again, just another way that you can conserve on thread wraps and not build a lot of bulk right at the head where it's real critical. Tighten the knot. We'll come in, we'll trim off our thread. Go ahead and stand up that post, and we're going to trim this off about an eye's length above the hackle. So we'll come in with our scissors, stretch the foam slightly, and just cut that off. There's a completed parachute emerger. Again, a great pattern of a lot of different varieties of situations that you can fish it in, and a lot of great techniques that you can use. Again, that thread body with a thread rib is tremendous for working on a lot of these little micro patterns. I hope you enjoy this fly and have some good success fishing it.